Hi everyone, and welcome to week 5. In the past 4 weeks, we've covered some of the fundamental concepts in digital music making, such as finding material, arranging material in our project, mixing the material, and then applying some effects and automation before we export our project. And with those basics covered, we'll take the next 4 weeks leading up to your second assessment to look at the concepts of rhythm and rhythmic division more closely. So what we'll be doing today to get us kicked off is building a drum beat from scratch using samples. But before we get started, there's just a few things I'd like to cover about the topic of rhythm for anyone who's inexperienced. So to speak broadly, rhythm in music is very much about division. You'll see in this bar across the top of your workspace that time has been divided into bars and then beats, and as we zoom in further, smaller and smaller divisions of those beats. So getting quite small. You'll notice that each of these divisions are evenly spaced, which is to say that rhythm is all about dividing units into smaller even units. So with that more conceptual perspective in mind, we'll zoom back out and discuss time signature. So you would have noticed in your previous work up here that we can change the tempo and the key signature of our project. What we haven't discussed yet is this pair of numbers here, the time signature, usually represented as a fraction. And what this basically tells us is how many beats each bar in our song will be broken up into. You'll notice that each bar in this blank project, represented by these bar lines numbered up the top here, have been broken down into 4 even sections, represented by these notches here. And each of these even divisions is a beat. So if I were to go up here and change this time signature to 3/4, you'll notice that the bars have changed their duration or length. So now each bar is divided into 3 beats. Now the actual practical effect of different time signatures, also called meters in music, is that it changes the feel of the music. So if we strip away things like the style and the instruments and things like that, a waltz that's in 3 will sound very different to something like a rock song in 4, or an EDM track. Now we notice this difference in feel quite implicitly because we all have a sort of innate musical training given to us by our cultural exposure to music. But to explain more clearly for anyone unfamiliar, the way that you can detect time signature is by counting along to a song in even beats just with the pulse of the music, as if you were a dance instructor, and see if you can count to 3 or 4 before it repeats. Now of course in the modern day you don't need me as your metronome. We can come up here and make sure our click is toggled on in GarageBand, and then we can listen just to the bare pulse of different time signatures. So if I press play, you'll hear that the first of every group of 3 beats has been emphasized to demonstrate its feel. So now if we change back to 4/4, meaning that there'll be 4 beats for every bar, we'll have a listen and consider the difference. So now you can hear that GarageBand was emphasizing the first of every group of 4. So what we've just discussed now actually refers to the first of these 2 numbers in a time signature. So that first number, a 3 or a 4, or any other number, just refers to how many beats make up a total bar, how we're dividing the music and considering it. For anyone curious, the second number refers to the type of beat we're counting, but that's a little beyond the scope of this course. So we'll just be considering time signature as how many beats are in our bar, as indicated by this first number here. So the reason I've explained all that is that understanding time signature and how beats and bars are divided more generally is really important for when we try to build a drum beat from scratch, as well as anything in music that we try to compose from the ground up. But I'll go ahead now and actually demonstrate building a drum beat out of samples. So I'll put this play out to the start. And if I just resize my GarageBand project for now, you'll see I have here ready a collection of different samples, which are simply from the drum pack, which is available on Blackboard for download directly from the resources folder. So these 4 folders contain different samples for each section of the drum kit. Now the difference between a sample and a loop as far as this course is concerned is that the loops we've been working with are more cohesive pieces of music, usually at least a bar long, whereas a sample is typically an individual event. So something like a single snare hit or one chord on a piano or a short vocal excerpt. And so the first thing we're going to want to consider if we build a drum beat is the layers of our drum beat. So traditionally we'll want a kick or a bass drum, we'll want a snare drum or an equivalent like a hand clap or a stick sound, and then we'll want some type of hi-hat or cymbal. So I'll just find a sample of each of those now, and then drag them into the project for demonstration purposes. We might drag in this bass drum, just here. Then we'll come back and drag in a hi-hat. Now for those who know drums, a hi-hat can be open and closed. So we'll bring in a closed hi-hat for the regular pulse in our music, and then we'll come back and find an open hi-hat for emphasis. So drag this one in too. And then finally we'll also grab a snare sample. We'll just choose another one. Let's go with this. Great, so now that we have those in our project, I'll just resize the GarageBand window, and we'll start talking about how we can use these samples to actually construct a beat. So what I've skipped here just to save time is the auditioning process. Typically you'd be listening to the sample to see if it's the kind of snare or kick sound that you like. Yes, these will just be for demonstration's sake. So to begin with, I'll select them all and then just move them out of the way for the moment so that we can talk about how we might begin. Now of course there's many different styles of music and with them many different drum beats. But again, to begin with, we're just going to construct something quite conventional, just in 4/4, to kind of introduce the process of working with rhythm. So to do that, let's come up here to the top bar and then just drag the first 2 bars across as our cycle range, meaning that these 2 bars will loop continuously as we play. This is a useful tool for actually hearing our drum beat without having to copy it throughout the project or loop it or anything like that. We'll just hear it looping and we can examine. So with that, I'll move these back a little closer just to make it a bit easier. And then I'll zoom in so that we can see a more detailed division of all of these beats here. So often a good place to start if you're unfamiliar is with the hi-hat, as it's typically quite regular and you don't have to spend so much time deciding where to put it. So typically in a lot of drum beats there'll be a hi-hat at least on every beat. So if I go ahead and highlight this hi-hat and then copy it onto each beat of this project, like this. And of course we could then select each of these and copy them all together to save time in the second bar. We can have a listen to see how this sounds as a starting point. Good, so this music now clearly has a pulse. If we wanted to change that pulse, like always, we could come up to tempo and raise or lower it to something that suits us better. So say 100. You'll see that GarageBand has still intelligently moved those samples back to the bar line that you've intended, even though the tempo's now changed. So I'll put it back to the original 120, and then we'll start to consider some of these other layers. So another common step would be to grab this bass drum sample here and place it on at least the first and third beat of each bar in our music. So I'll have it here, again on the third beat, and don't worry if these overlap, they just chop into one another, and then I'll copy those again. So of course by default GarageBand is helping me just snap these to the bar lines to make sure it's all in time. Let's go back to the beginning and have a listen. Good, so already we're seeing that we're starting to build up a bit of a drum beat. Last we'll take the snare, and then in opposition to the bass drum we'll put it on the second and fourth beat of every bar, often called the backbeat. And this alternation between the kick and snare drums is kind of the backbone of a lot of drum beats. It's the kind of traditional framework from which we make things more complicated. So I'll select the snare, and then copy it onto the second and then fourth beat of each bar, like this. So now let's have a listen to all of that together. Good, so as we can hear, we now have a very basic drum beat that we've built ourselves from samples. So of course you might ask, why not take the substantially quicker route of just using a loop? And the reason, as you can see, is that when we use samples, we're allowed to determine the placement of each note. So to demonstrate, you may decide that the pulse doesn't feel quite quick enough, it doesn't feel energetic, and we don't always have to alter the tempo to change that. One thing we can do is take all of the hi-hats that we've just put in and have them occur twice as often. So of course if we have them all highlighted and copy them across to the beat in between each of the hi-hats that we've already placed, it will change the kind of effect of that drum beat. Let's have a listen. Already it's picking up a bit. Now if that had been a loop and we wanted the hi-hats to do something different, we'd have to scrap it and find a whole new loop. Whereas this approach allows us to construct the drum beat precisely how we want it. So as another example, let's say we want a little more variety at the ending of this drum beat. We could take this final hi-hat and replace it with the open hi-hat that we brought in before. Now again, this is very common in drum beats. Here's how it sounds. And again, that level of editing wouldn't have been possible with a loop. So now that we've built a kind of basic scaffold for this drum beat, let's see what we can do to make it a little more complex or a little more tailored to the style that we're trying to create in. So I'll just get rid of these here now that we use them all, and then zoom in a little further. So now at this level of detail, we can actually see each beat. So these here are the beats, represented numerically now. But yes, we can see that each beat is now divided into 4 individual sections. So now we might want to try placing samples on some of those smaller divisions to see how they sound. For example, I could take this snare drum here and place it on the 4th subdivision of this second beat here. So let's have a quick listen on repeat. I'll just drag this cycle region back to the single bar. Already that has a bit of a different character. And of course we could do the same to the bass drum. So I'll take this kick drum here, drag it back a little, and then copy it onto the second division of this third beat here. So this second division of the third beat. Let's have a listen to how that sounds. So again, it has a little more character, it's a little more interesting because we're starting to experiment with where we place different sounds. And of course we can apply this to the second bar too. So I'll drag this out a little longer and then just drag out this sample here just to complete it. We'll use something similar to the first bar by copying the snare to the 4th subdivision of the second beat. And again, we'll do something similar with the bass. So here, But then we might want something else just to distinguish the second bar from the first. We do already have this open hi-hat here, but maybe we want to add another kick. So again, we'll select it and then maybe copy it to the second division of the fourth beat. If we want it to be neat, we could drag these back to the end of the bar line, same as the open hi-hat. Then let's go back to the start and have a listen. Great, and so the other thing we can tell is that it's looping without any issue, meaning that it'll be appropriate to use again and again in our project. So just to demonstrate a little further again, we could still change those hi-hats if we wanted them to be even quicker. All we'd have to do is highlight over them all. We could drag all of them at once back a little just to make some room, so back to a single division of a beat. And then once more, with them all highlighted, copy them again into that blank space. Let's have a listen to how they sound when they're twice as fast again. So of course now we have something very different to what we started with, and it's something we've constructed ourselves. I'll just do one final demonstration to show the benefit of us being able to edit like this. So perhaps I don't actually like that hi-hat sound after all. I can go and get rid of them all, and replace them all with open hi-hats. But to give the drums a different feel, I'll only put them on the off beats, so only halfway between each beat, never actually on the beat itself. Like this. And of course we could just copy. And then just one more here. I might also complicate the bass part a little further, so we could take this, maybe try this division here, this part of the beat, might replicate the decision we made later and bring this into the first bar, and then just add a few more, again, for demonstration's sake, maybe even some quicker kick drums. So let's remove this one, copy this a few more times, drag it out a little, and then see how it sounds. Good, so again, pretty quickly we already have a totally different beat that we can very precisely define. Hopefully some of you find this exciting in some way. But yeah, it's kind of our first introduction to having a bit more control over our music making. So to get everyone started this week, what I'd encourage you all to do is to build a drum beat with 3 layers like this one here. So a kick, a snare, and a hi-hat of some kind. They can be any equivalent, of course. You could use a clap for the snare or a different kind of cymbal like a ride instead of a hi-hat. And of course any other digital sounds that fill these roles too. But yeah, try to construct something with 3 layers, a simple drum beat, and experiment with the effect of placing samples on different beats. Again, all of the samples I used here today are available on Blackboard as a direct download. You don't have to go to a site and make an account or anything. But of course you can source samples from anywhere on the web in the same way that you source loops. Enjoy starting to work with samples, and again, as always, any questions you can feel free to direct to the forums or our Collaborate session this week. I hope you all enjoy. Thanks.